As someone who is incredibly politically active and incredibly immersed in the music scene, a lot of what you are passionate about relies on sort of this person-to-person interaction. Whether you're saying "fuck you" to the cops or whether you're saying "fuck you" to the cops into the microphone at a concert, you sort of need to be there in sort of these face-to-face interactions. But obviously, with coronavirus, I can only imagine how much your life has had to change. What's it been like for you since the outbreak of COVID-19, and what changes have you had to make to adapt to this new way of living?
I think the hardest part is because I'm a teacher. That's my job. So since January, we haven't seen our kids. Our schools have been closed since January, and I know you guys are dealing with all that stuff now.
Mm-hmm.
But we're at least in Hong Kong. I think we're all very much have adjusted to this new way of life, and I think this new way of life is going to go on for a few more months now too. So I mean, what's been going on in Hong Kong is since January, since all of this exploded, and our government was so slow to react, and our government were adamant that we didn't need to wear masks and stuff. But we were like, whatever the government tells us to do, we are going to do the exact opposite. Like Hong Kong is the most punk rock Chinese city on the planet. And so, we took on our own. All the people of Hong Kong took it on themselves to like go figure out where to get masks from. Businesses were importing masks from around the world and handing them out to other Hong Kongers where the government wasn't being able to do it. They couldn't even source it. We were sourcing it ourselves by businesses in Hong Kong, and they were handing it out. People would buy boxes, go stand on the street and hand them out to like homeless people or the elderly who would have to wait for hours and hours. So it's been, like you said, like it is a change in terms of like that whole social distancing,
Mm-hmm.
the self-isolation, the quarantine things. But Hong Kong is such a resilient city, and we've been through this with SARS.
Mm-hmm.
So in our regards, we'll just keep going. Like we'll get through all of this. The scarier part is once all this subsides, we're back to square one. Like the political issues, the social issues have not been changed. They've been on pause. They've been on a heavy pause. So once all this stuff is gone, like everything's going to come back up, unless the government does something about it. And now we don't know. I mean, we have no say in this government. The government doesn't listen. We know that they're, like I said, they're puppets, and the CCP regime is going to keep them there because this government are completely, yes men. And so they're going to keep them here. So we don't know what to do.
Yeah, as someone living in the United States and living in Texas, the revolution is the furthest thing from happening in Texas than anywhere else, unfortunately. And it's always so interesting to watch everything that's going on in Hong Kong, because there's so much more unity and there's so much more support and there's so much more of a general awareness of COVID-19 as opposed to the United States, where people still think it's a hoax. And one of the biggest concerns regarding the spread of COVID-19 are sort of the increased levels of discrimination against Asians living in Western countries. I know that in the United States, in the UK, in Australia, hundreds of Asians have reported coronavirus-related hate crimes. It also doesn't help that the President of the United States continues to call this thing the Chinese virus, because it further perpetuates this idea that we should just blame all Asians. But in Asia, I know that things are different, and a different mix of people are being blamed and targeted for this virus. For example, we both spoke out on social media about the racism going on in Guangzhou with these Chinese landlords who are evicting African tenants. What other stories and issues related to the coronavirus in Asia should we be paying attention to? What's sort of on your radar? What isn't being told from your perspective?
I think that's a great question, man. You stumped me with that question. Good job. I think in general right now, besides the stuff that's going on, like you pointed out with the poor Africans in China, it again, for me, because we're living in Hong Kong and because we've gone through so much the past 9 months, like the virus really is not that big a deal. So in terms of what I'm thinking about, it's really the idea of the power of the CCP regime, man. When it comes down to it, it's really the power of money for them. And what is on the radar for a lot of us is that it seems like, I don't know, man, I'm just an everyday guy, just reads a lot of stuff. That's all. Is that people seem to have started to wake up to what the CCP has been doing to its own people and what it's been doing to people around the world. Like they take advantage of a lot of poor countries by going in to build all these infrastructure, and then those countries fall into like debt, serious debt, and then the country, and then the CCP regime then owns that infrastructure, like a ferry terminal or an airport or whatever it is, and then it's under CCP control. So I mean, I think when it still comes down to it, it's that people are waking up to what's going on. My main concern always will be is this whole idea of racism and trying to find someone to blame. And so then, like you're saying with the whole Chinese virus thing, like actually in Hong Kong, people are not upset about it being called a Chinese virus. They're like, call it a Chinese. They're like, yes, absolutely, it came from China. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's what I found really interesting. Like, there is that dynamic. So can you sort of go into that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a very interesting time we're living in Hong Kong, and so like in Hong Kong, I mean, they're like, yeah, call it a Chinese virus, whatever it is, but of course, a lot of us would prefer if people called it the CCP virus. You know what I mean? Or like, a lot of actually, people in Hong Kong actually have no problem with where it's from. Like they said, like the African flu or whatever, the Ebola virus, or that whatever it was, like that. There's the name just is associated with where it was found, like where as ground zero is. There really isn't an issue with all that. I mean, like I was saying earlier, it's more me trying to remind people that the whole racism part, like looking for people to blame, that's the real virus. You know what I mean? That's the real virus, and you've got to understand when the governments are throwing that down. They're like, oh, it's the Africans, get them out of here. They're just dividing and conquering, man. That's all they're doing. They're dividing your city. They're dividing your country, dividing the population, so it's easier for them to control everything. So for me, it's always like when people are like, oh, Chinese people this, Chinese people that. Even for me, I live in Hong Kong. I'm like, dude, you can't talk about 1.4 billion people that way. Yeah. I'm not an anti-China person. I love China, man. China's a great country. China, the way I look at it is the CCP regime has 1.4 billion people under hostage. That's the way I look at it. And so for me, it's just like, how do you go in and make sure you access those people and let them know, like, this is going on. Don't worry, we got your back. And that's what Hong Kong is starting to do. They're starting to look out for, their friends and family up in China. Like the stuff with Guangzhou going on with the Africans. At the same time, there's also Guangzhou residents coming out to provide food and blankets to these poor Africans and stuff like that. So it's just like, there's always going to be a media attent to all of this, and so it's hard to read all of this, or hard to gauge all of this right now. But at the end of the day, it's just like, man, this whole any type of discrimination or racism based on your own fear of something you've got to study that, man. You got to take that apart, disseminate all that understanding in your brain, amongst your community, amongst your city or country, or what it is. Why is it that you're trying to find these scapegoats when you know what the real issue is?
Yeah, and that's what I like to try to remind people, is that there is a tactical device going on when you try to attribute these names or point blame to any one particular group, because at the end of the day, like you said, it really isn't a racial or it isn't something based off of a particular group. We need to be blaming more governments and more systems for the failures of this spreading, as opposed to the actual individuals. Now, if we wanted to follow the issues and everything that's going on in Asia politically, and the plight of the working class and the people who are looking to who are trying to fight for change, what news sites, magazines, publications, media outlets would you recommend for people who are living outside of Asia and who want to be able to acclimate themselves to what's going on over there? Because for me, like, over the last few years, I had been writing for, for my whole entire writing career, I've been writing for Asian American issues primarily. And I think one of the fascinating things about my work is that over time, I've tried to figure out what it means to be Asian American. And in part of that discovery, I've realized that there's so little that I know about what's going on for other Asians living outside of the United States. And so I've been trying to understand more about what's going on in the Philippines, or what's going on in China, or what's going on in Southeast Asia. So what would you recommend, and what are some go-to publications and sources that you sort of glean all your information from?
That's hard to say again because of how complicated it is out here. I do know that my favorite platform currently seems to be Twitter, surprisingly, because actually Twitter in a lot of Southeast Asian countries and around Southeast Asian countries mainly, like Philippines, Singapore, whatever, there seems to be a lot more freedom for people to express themselves. And so while they're expressing themselves through Twitter in that format, there's a lot of information that gets sent around. It's so quick. So there's a lot of quick information, like all that stuff about Guangzhou. Actually, I didn't pick it up from Hong Kong's favorite platform, which is Facebook. Hong Kong's favorite platform by far is Facebook. We use that for everything. But I got it from Twitter because it's so quick. People quickly put like a comment up and it gets shared and it gets disseminated. More information gets added to the conversation, the threads. That's where it's really been a lot of my stuff has been coming from that. But in terms of Hong Kong specifically, I mean, the two main sources that I definitely use is something called Hong Kong Free Press and then RTHK. Hong Kong Free Press is a English publication in Hong Kong, and they are very much neutral in terms of how do they disseminate the information that comes in and then how to send it back out. So that's a good source for people who are trying to find out what's going on more in Hong Kong. RTHK, surprisingly enough, has the government financial backing, but they are very much a neutral platform, and they've really been giving it back to the government and to the police. And so it's really interesting that the police and the government and all the pro-CCP groups in Hong Kong have been at their gates protesting and yelling and telling them like, you're a government has been paying for you. You should be more supportive of the government. You should be blah, 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 blah. And so the RTHK right now is something that all Hong Kongers fully support 100%.